Welcome everyone for this very special, at least for me, or to me, a very special panel today with Joni Harris from Vox, with a V, not an F, obviously. You knew that. Yeah, and I think I don't even want to introduce Johnny because he will just introduce himself the best, and he will do a quick presentation. It will last maybe like 20 or 25 minutes, and then we have a lot of time for asking questions, get really into the stuff that you want to know and that I want to know. So yeah, without further ado, Johnny Harris.
Thank you. I'm trying a new thing. You can pair your phone with your computer and use it as a remote, and I'm trying to get it to work, and it's kind of working, kind of not. One sec.
It's our fault because the cable is just not long enough for some reason.
Okay, let's see. I think it'll work now. Whoa. It's working. Amazing. Hey guys. So my name is Johnny, as Julian mentioned, and I today want to talk about Borders, which some of you may know about, some of you may not. I'm going to explain what that is. It's the project I've been focusing on for now 2 years. Wow, it's been kind of like the center of my world for 2 years now. And I'll talk more about that later. But first I want to talk about what Vox is, because I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Vox and have read Vox or consumed some of Vox's products, but it's very different to kind of do that and then to see the background of like what Vox is and what the concept is behind Vox and where it came from. So, here, I have an idea. I actually don't need audio right away, so I'm just gonna unplug this, ring it right up. Should be good. Okay. Much better. Vox is a company that was born in 2014 in the United States. It's an online news outlet. And as Julian mentioned, it's very important to know that it's not this. Okay. Whenever I tell people I work at Vox, they like pause and they're like, "You work where?" Like, no, Vox. In fact, I've just started saying like, "I work at Vox with a V." Like, they're like, "Why do you have to say with a V? Like, that's so weird." So we're not Fox News. It's a very different thing. I actually learned since I've been here in Switzerland that the focus on public media and kind of public broadcasting is a value that a lot of European countries have. We don't really have that in the United States, and the result is 24-hour news cycles and a bunch of terrible things. So we're not that. Vox is built on a premise that there is a demand and an appetite to understand the news. And the word we use to describe that is explain. We say that there is a useful space in the media landscape right now to explain the news. And I want to explain to you what the word explain means, because this is a word that actually has a lot of meaning for us at Vox. We believe that there is a lot of information in the world, that there's tons of work being done right now to gather data, to do analysis, to do really good reporting, and the shortage of information is not a problem anymore. There's now an overabundance of information. And so we at Vox say, okay, there's all this information, that's not the problem. The problem is that this information is barred off from a mass audience. It's usually super niche or super specialized so that only a few people who have specialized knowledge or expertise can understand the academic papers that are coming out, the data, the studies, things like that. And that our job as people who are journalists but also experts in different fields focus on taking the news when the news hits and surrounding it with all of this really good context, this information that gives us an understanding of why things are happening, the bigger, broader picture, instead of just the report of, oh, this terrible thing happened in Myanmar. We don't just say this terrible thing happened in Myanmar, we say, well, there's a bigger picture here. And we've done the work to understand the broader context. And then we use that to funnel that into graphics or articles or videos that can then connect with a mass audience, so that a mass audience can understand this stuff that is often inaccessible to just a normal person who wants to understand the world but doesn't have a specialization. That is the focus of Vox, to explain the news with context. and it's kind of the center of what we do. It's the result isn't some dense report. It's usually something approachable and easy to understand like this, but within an article like this, you will find deterrence theory and geopolitics and really dense expert-like topics that are embedded into an easily digestible article. We've had success in the past 4 years since we were growing. These are old numbers, but needless to say, it's gone well for us. There's clearly a demand for this idea of explaining the news. Video is what I am interested in as someone who focuses on, oh, perfect. Now we have audio. Everything is in order. Oh. Okay. Luckily we don't have to worry about audio for a moment. A lot of this is no audio. Video is the thing that I work on, and the Vox video team is different than just the straight up newsroom. We have our own culture and kind of our own experience. If you've seen a Vox video, you'll understand that it feels different. And when I first started at Vox, a lot of people from like the New York Times or like big legacy companies, New York Times, NBC, National Geographic, would ask me like, well, what are you guys doing? Like, what's the secret to your success? Because we grew really quickly. One guy from the New York Times who, ready to go? Awesome. One guy asked me, well, what's your secret sauce? Like, what's like the magic bullet here? And there is no secret sauce. There's no like one thing, but there are certain aspects of our team culture and our approach that I feel like have been vital for the success of Vox Video, and that's what I want to talk about today, of what is our secret sauce. The first one is summed up in this quote from my boss. One time I asked him straight up, like, what's our secret sauce? And he was like, well, we just hire, my boss is like, his name's Joe, he's the director of our team, and he's just like, well, so nonchalant, we just hire creative people and we like let them make stuff. And actually that sounds so informal and mundane, but it actually sums up the key philosophy. In a traditional environment in media, there's a pretty bright line in between the writer, the person who has the ideas, understands facts, understands the craft of journalism, understands the nuance of being sensitive and ethics and all of that, and the technician, the person who presses the buttons, who knows how to run the camera, who knows how to edit the video and do the animations. This is a very rational thing to do, to say like, these are different skill sets, let's divide them. And usually there's someone on top who's the editor or the editorial person who basically decides, okay, this is what we're gonna cover, and they make assignments to the staff, and the staff goes and specializes in their different skill sets. Again, I don't disparage this model. This is worked because there is specialization here, and it makes sense to divide these things up. At Vox, we are engaged in the experiment of what happens when you dissolve these boxes and you get rid of this line, and you say, what if we combine some of these roles, and we kind of make more gray area in between these divisions? So my colleagues at Vox are not just journalists or just video makers or just designers. They're kind of from like every background. Like I've got colleagues who studied like geography and others who studied education. They're from such a diverse background. Some are traditional filmmakers, some are animators and designers. Me, I was an international relations major. I never studied video, I never studied journalism. And yet we say to these people, you are now a creator. You now have the right to have a vision of something you want to create. And that's what unites all of us, is that we have the desire to make stuff. And we have the desire to learn a lot of different skills in order to make stuff. This ideal leader at the top, we still have obviously a hierarchy and management and direction, and we have bosses. But this person, instead of being the owner of the editorial vision and the ideas, becomes a facilitator. We call them a story editor or like just a manager. They are in the job, and instead of assigning us ideas, they surround us with the things we need. They facilitate the vision that we have. When I came into Vox, I wasn't a trained journalist. I wasn't super good at animation. I knew international relations, and I knew video, because I'd done a lot of video on the side. I needed help, and I needed training in the craft of fact-checking in the craft of reporting, all of these things that you learn in journalism school I didn't have. Vox could have said, okay, that's not your skill set. You make the videos and talk to the international relations experts. We'll have someone else write the scripts. And they could have done that. Instead, they said, okay, let's train you up. Like, let's teach you this skill that you don't have. And this isn't some, like, lovey-dovey, we're all holding hands, being like, let's teach each other things. Like, it's not like that. It's like hardcore, I turn in a script, and my editor says, no, like, this is thin on facts. This makes no sense. This was a logical jump that you're gonna get torn apart on the internet if you publish this. Like, they teach us, they basically say, you have the ability to learn these skills, and we're gonna teach you them. We're not just gonna, like, let you do it poorly previously. So this, to me, I was really grateful for this model because I didn't have the opportunity to learn a lot of these skills, but at Vox, they gave me the opportunity and the rigor to step up and learn reporting and design. I had an art director who really, really honed my colors and my composition and things like that I didn't really have any formal training in. That's number one. So that's a big focus, is that concept of empowering creators, and that's a very different model. The second ingredient, or the second notion, is this idea that aesthetic matters. If you've seen a Vox video, you know that they're beautiful, that we put a lot of focus in the way that they look. There's kind of this traditional idea that for something to look good, like, that's for the advertisers. Like, the advertisers can have the budgets to make beautiful looking output. Us journalists and documentary makers, like, we don't have to focus on that because we're about story, we're about facts. Okay, we don't have to worry about it looking beautiful because if story is king. I believe story is king, but I believe delivery and aesthetic really make a difference and can really empower a story to go further and to connect with people in a way that it wouldn't if it didn't have that same delivery. We put a focus on that at Vox, and you can see that in the output. If you we'll watch a little video here that's kind of a mashup of a few pieces from my colleagues that demonstrate the focus on story, but also aesthetic as well.
To understand ISIS, it helps to tell the story of its rise. And that story begins far away and many years before the group existed. In 1979, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan to defend a puppet dictator against rebels.
I think everybody would say, oh yeah, there must be a spike for World War I. You know, sure enough, there it is, like 25 million. And there must be a big spike for World War II, and there it is, it's like 65 million. But then you'll see this other spike that is as large as World War II right after World War I. And most people, a lot of people would say, well, what? What was that?
The party has undergone a remarkable transformation from the party of Abraham Lincoln to the party of Donald Trump.
Earth has gone through immense climate changes many, many times before, in some cases leading to mass extinctions. But life persisted. Mammals evolved from reptiles and primates from mammals. They stood up and walked out of Africa, eventually reaching the corners of every continent. But only after well over 100,000 years of wandering did the real human innovation happen, when 12,000 years ago we stopped foraging and started farming.
He's intent on pushing back against the Western world order, and it appears to be working.
Putin, Vladimir Putin, 17 years and the most powerful man in the world.
The pioneering facial detection tool is called the Viola-Jones algorithm. The algorithm takes an average face from that trained data and aligns it with the image from your phone's camera, scaling it and rotating it according to where it already knows your face is located. But it's not a perfect fit, so the model analyzes the pixel data around each of the points, looking for edges defined by brightness and darkness.
The next month, in September, Russia intervenes on behalf of Assad, sending a few dozen military aircraft to a long-held Russian base in the country. Russia says it's there to bomb ISIS, but in fact only ends up bombing anti-Assad rebels, including some backed by the US.
Whether that's building roads or setting up effective power grids or making sure that we've got high quality public education and the teachers are paid enough, the market will not cover those things. A lot of that burden for making sure that the pie was broadly shared took place before government even got involved.
Aesthetic matters. You'll see some of that stuff that is purely decoration, like that Obama interview didn't have a ton of useful data. It was more decoration, but you'll also see visuals that are helping, that are beautiful, but also help explain the concept, like that facial recognition, process animation. We see visuals, if we're gonna be in the business of making videos, like we wanna make our visuals beautiful so that they can connect with people. Aesthetic matters, and that's a huge value at Vox. The third concept is an idea that is one I'm continuing to learn and develop theories about, which is the internet is a place where we can actually respect intelligence. There's another, what I believe is a fallacy, that on Facebook, people won't sit around and actually engage with useful, rigorous content, that it's all about the ADD generation of people who only have 30-second attention spans, and we need to make these really short, pithy videos so that we can grab their attention before they continue to scroll. There's obviously truth to that, and Facebook has indeed rendered a lot of outcomes that are bad for the brain and bad for society. But I think there's a flip side to this coin, which is the internet, because of its seamless transfer of information, also allows you to make stuff that people will be able to access all around the world and will be able to engage with in an unprecedented way. I learned this a couple years ago when I first started at Vox. We had this idea that, okay, we need to make 3-minute videos. Like, that's the sweet spot, 3 to 4 minutes. At first it was 2 minutes, and then we're like, okay, maybe we can do 3 to 4. 3 to 4 minutes was the sweet spot in like 2015. In late 2015, Syrian civil war was like ramping up. Everyone was like, what? I keep hearing about Syria, what is happening here? That's our job as Vox to be like, okay, what's the context? Let's give you the context. So I teamed up with the foreign editor, and we made this Syrian civil war explainer. It's the Syrian civil war explained in 6 minutes. Okay, when I was writing this, we kind of did the word count, and we're like, this is gonna be a 6-minute video, like 6.5 or something. Like, this is gonna be a long video. And I remember presenting that in Slack to my bosses, and they're just like, that's way too long, like cut it in half. Like, this needs to be like the sweet spot, 3 to 4 minutes. So I was like, okay, so I go back to the foreign editor, I'm like, we gotta cut this in half, and he's like, there's literally no way we can cut this in half without like dramatically underselling and mischaracterizing the complexity of this war. Like, we have to keep it at this length. I was like, all right, so we kept it at the length, and I was like, guys, we have to keep it at this length. And we kind of came to the conclusion, like, okay, this will be like our big prestige play. We did the big explainer. No one's gonna watch it besides like other journalists, and like, we'll just deal with it. And like, you know, we were like, too bad. Like, we have to make a 6-minute video, but at least we're gonna do the topic justice. We published this video, and it goes bonkers, just totally nuts on the internet. Got over 100 million views on Facebook. On Facebook, the platform that's supposed to be giving us all ADD, people are sitting around and watching a 6.5-minute video about the complex geopolitical situation of the Syrian civil war. And it's not like this has flashy visuals. This is a camera roaming around a map with little people moving around in colors. It's the simplest thing, but it demonstrates that people want to know. People are curious, and if you can give them good, well-presented information, they will consume it, and they will consume it for long amounts of time. Later that year, I continued to push this experiment, and I created an Israel-Palestine explainer. And you can't explain Israel-Palestine in 6 minutes, so the script ended up being 10.5 minutes, and I was like, oh geez, like this is too much, 10.5 minutes. And that got over 1 million views on YouTube and did really well on Facebook as well. So we started to realize, like, this time thing is totally arbitrary. Like, we have this idea of the sweet spot. It's totally wrong. It's totally wrong. My Borders documentaries are 12 to 15 minutes, and people watch them. Millions of people watch them on the internet, the ADD internet. I believe that this is a fallacy, and that we can push past it and say, instead of the internet being a place where we have to earn people's attention for short amounts of time, why don't we see it as a challenge to earn people's attention for a long amount of time? And we can do it. I have proof that we can do it. With the right presentation, you can earn people's attention, even on Facebook. So, respecting intelligence, saying our audience wants to understand this stuff, it's our job to earn their attention for 12, 15, and who knows, maybe next year I'll be making like 20-minute videos. So, we'll see. So, I wanna go back to this concept, because this is, to me, the foundation of everything I've been able to do at Vox. This concept that I'm a creator with a vision, and I've been empowered by this organization to learn a bunch of different skills and to break down those barriers between writer and technician in order to do my own thing. So I started making documentaries in 2015, late 2015, because of this. We weren't making documentaries at Vox, but I said, why don't we? And they said, well, because we don't have money to hire a crew. And I was like, well, what if I just do all of it and on my own and it save us a bunch of money? And they're like, all right. So they gave me the opportunity, which changed my life. Like the fact that they took that bet to say like, okay, like you think you can go report something, write it, animate it, like run the camera, do all of that, like go prove it. And if it works, you can keep doing it. When you are empowered as a creator to go do something like that, you step up to the plate. The creative juices flow in a way that they just don't in any other way when you're told to do something. And I stepped up and started making these documentaries, better work than I'd ever done because I had that responsibility. And so I did a few of those documentaries, and then eventually, because they were working, Vox said, do you want to make it into a series? And that's where Borders comes in. Borders, in late 2016, I pitched this idea of what if I made documentaries specifically about border zones? So that next year I went around to 6 different places. Oh, 6 different places. There's a little video there, but I don't think it's worth watching right now because it's an older video, and anyway, we'll talk about it. Went to 6 different borders and told the human stories of what happens when you draw lines on a map. If you haven't seen season 1 of Borders, you should go check it out. It's a lot of work, and I'm proud of it, so go watch it. So the thing with Borders, and I'll just quickly talk about this, and then I'd love to actually hear your questions about Borders itself and we can even watch a specific clip from Borders, and you can ask questions about it. But the thing that makes Borders special in my mind, and again, this comes back from my Vox empowering me to say, like, how do you want to do this? I said, I want there to be a crowdsourcing component to this. I want there to be a community aspect that isn't just the American dude, parachutes into places around the world and tells their story, but that the people tell me what's interesting and tell me what's sensitive. And so luckily at Vox, we have this amazing group of engagement people, the engagement in social media, who understand online communities and the power of creating a community around a topic. And so they mobilized and were like, yeah, if you want to do crowdsourcing, we'll do it. And so we've created this thing where when I decided to go to a place, Hong Kong was our most recent experiment in this, they will mobilize and we'll send out, we'll make a video about it, we'll send out a petition for people to enter into this locals network. We want locals who live in Hong Kong to be a part of this network so I can ask you questions before I go and enrich my reporting with local perspective. I sent this out, I made a video about it, sent it out, got 950 responses from locals, people who live in Hong Kong, who said, I want to contribute to this project. And every week, I would send out an email to these 950 people with all of my questions, all of my personal questions that I couldn't learn about on Wikipedia or by reading history books. How do you feel about Chinese encroachment? What are examples of British culture in your life that you see every day? How do you feel about your identity as your country, your city has been transferred from one country to another? And I would get these responses back and read hundreds and hundreds of people's nuanced personal accounts of how they feel. So then I'm suddenly not just the guy parachuting in telling these people's story. I'm now the guy who is trying to funnel and inject this local perspective into my reporting that makes me feel a lot more comfortable about my job, about traveling around the world and telling other countries' stories, because now I have 900 perspectives that help mold that reporting. This, to me, we're still figuring out how this works and how to best leverage this appetite to contribute, but it's created an environment and a community of people who want to be a part of this project, and it's made the video so much stronger. So, to sum up what we talked about today, before we dive into some questions and talking about specific things, I just want to say that the idea of empowering local creators, or not local creators, individual creators, to realize a vision and facilitating that is, to me, the future of media and the future of journalism on the internet. Because that is a language that we're used to seeing on the internet. Individuals taking control of the story they want to tell and making it happen without needing the gatekeepers of a big institution to like bless their idea. And the more that we as institutions, bigger companies can do that, can mimic that dynamic of empowering creators to go realize their vision and to facilitate that, the better work we're gonna see and the more fluent we will be in internet everything. And so I encourage all of you to think about what that means for your specific role and your institution and your teams, because I feel like we could use a lot more of that in media, and media will shine and be strengthened if we empower individuals to create. Thank you.
All right, I think I'll have some questions and then we'll open up for the public. What I'm really interested in is this whole process of crowdsourcing. So you get a lot of responses. So how many responses did you get for the Hong Kong one?
So for Hong Kong, which was a very local, pinpointed just for people in Hong Kong, we got 950, probably over 1,000 by the time it was all said and done, responses, which is a lot.
Isn't that more work for you?
Yes, so this is a big question. So actually, the bigger thing is, season one, we didn't crowdsource a specific city, we crowdsourced anywhere in the world. We're like, hey, where should I go next? Like, what border is interesting? And we got almost 8,000 responses, which, yes, was ridiculous. It was like, this is too much. That's why we pivoted and started this idea of local. 950 is a lot. However, the emails after, I was getting about 300 or 400 responses, which is still a lot, but I gotta say, it's still really powerful to, I was telling the story yesterday, when I got my first week's email back of all the responses, which is in a spreadsheet, it's through a Google form, so it's just a spreadsheet. So I have the question and then every one of the responses in one column. We were in Costa Rica and I was on this drive. I was like in a bus driving from one place to the other, and I had like this 5-hour window of time to just like work, and I pulled out my computer, opened up the spreadsheet, and I spent that whole 5-hour drive reading every response to like, how do you feel about Chinese encroachment? And it was like a surreal experience, because by the end of that drive, I think I even mentioned to I was like, I feel like I just spent a month in Hong Kong talking to people. Like, I just read every person's personal account, visceral identity sentiments that they were giving to me, and each one was different. Each one was slightly different. Everyone had different values, different perspectives. After reading these concentrated bits, to me, even though it was a lot, it was so incredibly helpful for waking me up to the sensibilities that I was walking into, the sensitivities of it.
So if I see it clearly, you have a community that works both ways. So one, it's kind of it spreads what you deliver. They're hardcore. A lot of them are hardcore fans.
Yeah.
Right. So I've dived quite deep into the Johnny Harris world, and there's like even whole threads about his jacket over there.
The orange
There's
jacket.
a lot of fans
There are
of this
threads.
jacket, right? So you have a lot of hardcore fans that obviously spread your work, but also they give you back a lot of wisdom and tips.
Yeah.
So did you think from the beginning it would work that way, or how did it develop to come that way?
We, at first, I remember in our very like initial meeting for Borders Season 1, we're like, hey, we should do this community thing. And I remember specifically we had this conversation where we're like, well, the idea that like we're gonna create this like community that's gonna help promote Borders is probably like wishful thinking. Like, to get people bought into it that much that they become the ambassadors of Borders and they share it with their friends and they're like hardcore fans, as you mentioned, like that's probably too optimistic. I don't think it is. I think if you have content that people really connect with and they feel like they're learning, they feel empowered by it, they do turn into ambassadors and they do turn into people who really like to identify with this thing. And that has happened for sure, and it's great. I think the bigger thing, though, the thing that I'm more proud of when it comes to the community, is when the Hong Kong locals who have contributed, they themselves have spent time and effort and given of their own personal perspective to help this project, when they feel proud of it, when they feel like, oh, I'm a part of this thing. In fact, I have an email right now from a Hong Kong local who's applying for university, and he was like, hey, can I get a letter from you that like says like, so I can put this on my resume that's like, I participated in this network. And I'm like, of course you can. Like you came to the meetup in Hong Kong, you gave me a little interview there, you sent questions, and like you were a part of this project. And they feel proud of that. They feel like they want to put that on their resume. That is what I'm more excited about, because then it feels like a collaboration. It doesn't just feel like I'm like mooching off of these people's information, like I'm just like getting free work. It feels like, no, we're collaborating to represent your city in the best way possible. And when I get that feedback, that's like what I feel most proud of. And I feel like that's the best use case of this kind of community building aspect.
So I think everyone in this room has a boss, and they're like, okay, we have to build a community on something, really, on some product or on our brand. And they're like, yeah, just do it on social media. So, but how do you actually do it? Because most of the time it just doesn't work. Nobody shows up.
No, okay, so here's the secret to community building. The secret to community building is that you don't focus on the thing you want right away. You don't, like for me, if I would have gone in and say like, hey, I just want people who live in Hong Kong, I wouldn't have gotten that. I wouldn't have gotten that because that was so specific to one demographic that I wouldn't have gotten a buy-in from a huge group. What we did first is we created something that felt universal, that felt like a community of anyone, Hong Kong or not, would be able to participate. And so what we did was, for season 1, we just asked, tell me where I should go in the world. What's a border that's interesting? And I got responses from random states in the United States that said like, oh, as soon as you cross from Kansas into like Missouri or whatever it is, I don't really even know if Kansas and Missouri are next to each other. I don't know the geography of the United States super well. I can tell you like every other country's border in the world, just not like my own. You like something changes with the healthcare and you can't actually get this and that. And suddenly people were thinking about borders in their own life. And so you need to find a universal value or a universal topic of interest that everyone can get on board with and create value around that. I made videos at the beginning that were just about new borders in the world. They weren't even about the borders I was reporting on. They're just like, look at these 10 new borders that exist. Everyone can relate to that. And then once we created a community around a universal value, then we started to hone in and say, okay, we're looking for people from Hong Kong. And now these thousands of people who are part of the broader community who are interested in borders say like, oh, my roommate in college is from Hong Kong. I'm gonna send this to him because like I'm now bought into this project. If you go into a crowdsourcing endeavor purely with the idea of like, oh, I want this one really specific thing, you're not gonna get it. You need to create universal buy-in from some value that you can rally a community around and then start to ask for very specific things. But that takes more time and nuance. That takes more of a process of building, even though you're not gonna get a lot in return at first. You're building a community, you're giving service to a community, and then you're asking something from them. It can't go quicker than that.
So how do you do that in a sense of you travel, you can't travel all the time. You cannot put on new content all the time. So how do you do that? Do you plan for that? Because sometimes you just put on some droney or like one shot or something.
Totally. I'm not super good at this, honestly. Like, if the engagement team at Vox, if they had their way, I would have like an editorial calendar that's like 6 months out, and I know exactly what I'm posting, and I'm re-upping old stuff at perfect times to fit with the news cycle, and like they have all these like desires for me to, and I just like I can't do that. I can't continually keep up this back and forth with the community. So I have like moments where I just kind of like disappear for a month, which is not, it's not best practice. I'm not recommending, but like for my own livelihood and sanity, I have to not always be in community building mode. But what I've tried to do is allow for the personal brand stuff to be of value to the community. So I've started introducing people to like my family, and started to introduce like other random trips. Like I'm posting about being here in Zurich, even though I'm not doing any borders stuff, to basically say like, hey, I'm the borders guy, but I'm not always doing borders. Like I have other things I'm interested in. That maybe again isn't the best practice if you're trying to build a really specific community, but it's what I've been able to do to continually keep up the community, even if I'm not doing borders 24/7, because that's just not really a feasible thing. So personal brand, I guess, would be the answer to that.
So Swiss people are very, what can I say? They're skeptic about being about vanity. So every time someone pops up in front of the television, people tend to think, okay, they're just really love themselves.
Totally.
So how does that work? Do you really love yourself, and that's why you're in front of the camera?
That's the only reason why I appear in front of camera. So this is an interesting discussion to have about the use, the function of appearing on camera. Because you're right, that there's a fine line between it being functional and it being a vanity project. And most, like you'll see so many instances where being on camera is purely a vanity project, especially on YouTube, where it is such a self-fulfilling thing that it's hard to re-render that as no, this is actually a useful thing. This is here to tell a different story. For me, as a journalist, I have to walk that line really finely because I can't make my story about Haiti and the Dominican Republic about me. If I were to go to Haiti and be like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so like sad for these people. That's such a natural thing for someone to do, and but it feels so insensitive. And so what I've decided to do is use the mechanism of vlogging or of this idea of turning the camera on yourself and say, this isn't about me, this is about you, the audience, who may be interested in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, or may be interested in Japan and North Korea, but you don't really have a gateway into that culture. And I don't either. I'm a newcomer to this. I'm not an expert in Japan and North Korea, but why don't I go on a journey to try to figure this out? I'll talk to experts, I'll highlight papers, I'll like do all the research, and I'll take you along with me. And maybe if I appear on camera, you then feel more like, okay, I can stomach this story that feels kind of complex and feels a little bit difficult because this guy is doing the work for me to go figure it out, and I can kind of relate to this guy. He's speaking in my vernacular. He is approaching this the way that I would potentially approach this if I had the time to do it. And so to me, it becomes a mechanism, it becomes a vessel for bringing people along on the journey. But there's a fine line where I could easily cross, and I may have crossed. It's the dark side of this, which is, woe is me, I'm over here like having such a difficult time, like trying to process how difficult and sad this is. I see that all the time on people, like especially YouTubers who try to do documentaries, and they're so used to the story being them that they have a hard time turning the camera and saying like, the story's not me, the story's these people. I'm here to help guide you through this. And when that's done well, it's really powerful. When it's done as a proxy for the viewer, as opposed to, look, I'm the story, and look at how I'm reacting to this experience. So it's a fine line, and it's one I'm constantly sensitive of, and it just scares me to death that like I have crossed that line and I don't even know it, because I wouldn't know it because it's a vanity thing, you know. But it's constantly on my mind for sure.
Do you think we should get into the whole aesthetic thing? Maybe like break down. Are people interested in like breaking down like concrete videos and how he actually does it? This might be really useful, right?
I'd love to show. I could show a clip of like from Hong Kong, maybe just like a 2 or 3 minute thing, and then take questions on like, how does this actually work? Like, how did you get this shot, or what was the thought behind this part of the script? I found that as a useful way to kind of start a discussion.
Yes,
so
let's
why
do
don't we
that.
do it? Cool. Okay. Let's see. Going here. Got lots of stuff open. Okay. Borders to output bank. Okay. Here are all the outputs from Hong Kong. And I'm trying to think what would be a good intro. Why don't we do this? We'll do the intro to this Erasing the Border piece, which is episode 2 of the Hong Kong videos. Let's play 2 or 3 minutes of this. I'm going to try to leave this bar open down here so that if you see the time code, you know, minute 14 seconds, jot it down and be like, at a minute and 14 seconds, you do the drone shot. How does that work? Or whatever. That's usually a helpful thing, but you don't have to be that specific. All right, here we go.
Look at eye level.
This is me in the middle of crossing one of the weirdest borders I've ever crossed.
The photo is being processed.
It's this one. It divides China from China. And it took me 2 hours to get through. This border is weird not only because it separates the same country into two, but also because it has an expiration date, July 1st, 2047. Until then, China has promised to stay out, to let Hong Kong be highly autonomous, hence the border. But the government of China doesn't really want to wait until 2047. They're ready to start erasing this border now, making Hong Kong a proper part of China. And one of the ways they're doing that is this huge bridge. Yeah, I know this isn't really the best shot, so here's a solution. The drone doesn't even have a microphone, but even still I couldn't help but say, take a look at this bridge as it was flying away. But seriously, take a look at this bridge.
China has unveiled the world's largest sea crossing bridge.
It's 55 kilometers, that's 34 miles. It's the longest sea crossing in the world.
The bridge connects Hong Kong with Macau and mainland China.
I always call this some sort of umbilical cord between Hong Kong and China. That they want something physical for you to register in your head that Hong Kong is part of China.
So this bridge and a bunch of other recent developments in Hong Kong are bringing up a lot of questions of what is Hong Kong? Who does it really belong to? And what happens when you erase a border? There you go. So that's the first 2 minutes of episode 2. I'm curious, is there anything in there that you have questions about? Yeah. Yeah, so my role in this is the shooting on the ground, the pre-reporting and the writing and the animation. So, yeah, so it's all mixed up, especially in a place like Hong Kong where I did 5 episodes in one location. It's more complicated when you do that because you suddenly have to plan everything out. Whereas if you're traveling from one place to the next, you can kind of do, each story in each location. It's kind of a nightmare. Like I in Hong Kong especially, because I wanted to try to do this experiment where I didn't do any voiceover. I did it all on camera, which is never going to do again, because I had to do all my writing beforehand and do all of my on-camera stuff, get all the facts right, get all of the framing and the sensitivities right with my language, like while it was there. And so what it looks like is you wake up in the morning, you say like, okay, I have this giant checklist of all the footage. I have to go out to the bridge. I have to get the shots of the Chinese flag. I have to get shots of the border. I have to go up to the border. And you just plot that out and you film it completely not linear, which you'll notice that I'm wearing the same shirt in this episode, because I was really concerned with the fact that I had to be wearing the same black shirt, or people would be like, why is he wearing a different, like, because I appeared for one thing, and then like the next moment, if I was wearing a different shirt, it would be weird. So I wore the same shirt like too many times in a row. And it was like incredibly hot in Hong Kong. I just don't recommend doing anything like that. So the point is, I'm still learning how this stuff works and like how to best do this format. But it basically is chaos. Like, it's like every morning I have this giant checklist and I'm constantly checking stuff off, and I'm like, oh, I still have to go down to the waterfront and do this thing, and I have to record. Am I wearing the right shirt? So next, in Colombia, I just got back from Colombia. It was much easier because I was in the South doing a story that I only had 2 days to do that story, and it took place in that region, and it was focused. And then I would fly somewhere else and do that story, and it wasn't as jumbled. But for Hong Kong, it was totally jumbled. Over the 12 days I was there, I shot for this piece probably every day, little snippets, and then I have to sort it all and arrange it all, and that's a whole different story.
So how different is it from what you planned?
It's always so different than what you planned, because you're sitting in an office in Washington, D.C. being like, oh, I can't wait to get this shot of this thing, like of this like building that has so much significance, and you show up and it's like, oh, this actually isn't a striking visual at all. Like, this is worthless. So I've actually started going on to Google Street View and like looking at everything before I plan it, because you read about it in I usually will read about it in some magazine feature or something where like they're describing it and it sounds all great, and then you get there and you're like, oh, this building is just totally boring. Like, it doesn't actually make sense for video. And so it's always different. And the way that the people say, like I always have like soundbite, like when I'm writing it before I go, soundbite, person says, you know, Chinese encroachment is making my identity feel uncomfortable. It's like these like perfect sound bites of like fantasy land. And then I show up and it's like they're saying all these other nuances and all these things. Like I'm like, no, I don't really want you to go that deep. And so it's always different. And you always have to pivot. But what I do before I go is I try to plan everything of my goal of what I do want. So I even have a script. It changes, but at least I have like the benchmark of what I want. It changes. This one changed a ton. Like this whole intro came like once I was back, completely different. So,
More questions, please. About this video.
it could be about this video, or it could be about general workflow and process. It doesn't have to be specifically with like time code. Did you have a question? Oh, a mic. Yes.
So what kind of tips do you have when it comes to gear? Because I think when you're traveling a lot, you can't take everything with you, like different lenses and heavy cameras, or
So especially for this sort of work where I'm alone and don't have like a crew or anything, the rule of thumb is just the simpler, the better. And now we live in an age where you can have a camera. My camera that I use for this is this camera. It's like a point and shoot. It's like a tourist camera. And I'm able to make the documentaries on it because it's so small but it's so powerful. So I use this camera, which is a Sony A7 III. I use two lenses, a 16 to 35 and a 24 to 70. And then I use a really small travel tripod that Manfrotto makes that fits in the water bottle holder on the side of my backpack. I use the smallest drone, not the smallest drone, but I use a small drone, the Mavic Pro. All of these tools are so powerful, and yet they're so small. You don't want gear to get in the way of access to cool stuff. And that can mean standing out. Like I can go into these places really easily because I have literally a backpack on with all of my gear in it. So I'm walking around with a backpack. I don't stand out, which is a big deal when you're shooting in places that are sensitive. And then it's just nice because you can slip in and out of places and quickly set up, film, and quickly get out of there. And you can cover a lot more ground. So smaller is better, and we don't have to sacrifice quality to go smaller anymore, which is amazing. So that's. I'm always in transition with gear. For Hong Kong and previous, I used an Osmo, which is a DJI product that's a little camera, like it's on a little selfie stick, and it has a gimbal on it, so it's super stable. I just got rid of that because it has some issues with it. The picture is unreliable and the sound is unreliable. And I got a Ronin gimbal, a Ronin S, which is a stabilizer that basically just keeps this thing really stable. And I used that in Colombia and liked it. It breaks down and I can just jam it in my backpack as well. So that's where I'm at now. I might change in the future, but my rule of thumb is always smaller is better. These gimbals are great though. They keep everything really stable, which is a big issue. So if I can integrate that Ronin into my workflow, it'll be great.
I'd like to know what you know about the people that watch your videos. Because I just imagine it's quite important to have kind of an image to be made before. Are they all from the United States or all over the world, young, old, how informed?
So by the data, it's basically the majority are US based. UK is kind of like a second place. So it's English speaking, US, Canada, and then a lot of European countries. And it's usually younger 18 to 35-year-olds. So it's a younger crowd. But if you look at the spread of it, meaning it's actually, Borders is watched by a huge international audience relative to our other videos. And so I think Borders is watched in like 160 countries, or like some giant number of countries. But in like Ethiopia, it's like 87 views or something. You know, it's not like the millions or whatever from the US. So it's not as big, but I do get a lot of emails from people who are really engaged, who are like, who really, it makes me feel like it's usually like a professor from like the Czech Republic who does economic history and like watches Borders. Those are the ones that I'm really excited about, because I'm like, oh, if I can appeal to like the 18 to 35-year-old masses, that's cool, and like they're watching rigorous content. But like if the professor who's teaching grad students wants to show this in their class, like that makes me feel even better, that it can appeal. And that's Vox's general philosophy, is like we want every curious person in the world to be able to consume our content and feel like they got something out of it, even if they are really smart people, or even if they're people who are not as informed about these issues. Everyone can access it. It's accessible to anyone who's curious. And that's a balance we really try to strike with this content. Yeah.
Do you ever get permits for your drone flights? I mean, especially the one in Hong Kong.
That's a good question. So in most countries, you can fly a small drone that's under, I think it's like 3 kilograms or something. It's different everywhere, but it's basically considered an amateur drone because it's so small in most countries. You can fly that as long as you stay under 100 meters and don't fly it over more than 12 people. Or there's like rules like that. For places like, I'm trying to think where, a lot of places don't have drone regulations at all. Like Haiti just doesn't, there's literally no drone regulation in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And then places like Morocco that do have drone regulations, I don't get permits. In fact, I go into Morocco because I'm covering something highly sensitive that the Moroccan government would never in a million years give me permission to cover, because it is a smear on their government, effectively, and the human rights abuses. I just sneak into the country and don't obey their laws, which I do that because I feel really strongly about the story. I feel like if I don't do it, like that story won't be covered. And so that's a call that I make with my editors to basically say like, okay, we're gonna go in and do this even though it's not technically legal by the local laws. But I minimize that. Like I've done that maybe a handful of times where I ignore regulations. Other questions? I saw one up here. No, maybe didn't. Oh yeah, right here.
Did you have legal issues before because of the videos?
Nope.
Okay.
Not yet.
When you go like to Hong Kong or Colombia, how far are you with your storyboard when you go there? Because you always do the you moderate when you're there in Colombia, or so you don't go back to Washington and then think, I want to tell this and that. How far are you when you go to the?
Let me show you. I can show you Colombia. Let's see. So this is a video you will see on the internet in a month. This is my new script system. It's like really fancy and color coded. I've never been this organized, but I'm finally I'm tired of scripts that are just full of garbage. And so it just links everywhere and fact checks everywhere. So I basically put my my voiceover in that font. The on-camera stuff I put in purple. When it's marked red, it needs fact check and source. When it's green, it's all sourced up in this far right column. Editor's notes go here, and yeah, there we go. So what this looks like is all this purple is something I write before I go down. And I pull this up on my phone when I'm sitting at the border with my camera, set up the tripod, and I read this to myself, and then I kind of memorize it, and then I riff on it, and I say a bunch of other stuff, and I spend 30 minutes. If you were to see my raw footage, it's not clean at all. Like, you guys see the edited version that's super clean and like the best take. I'm sitting here doing these 3 these first 4 paragraphs for like an hour. Like I'm sitting there saying it over and over and again in a million ways, saying other stuff, saying stuff, and then being like, that probably wasn't fact checked, like looking it up, reading Wikipedia articles, like saying other stuff. It's a mess. But I do it and eventually I get a really good take, and that's what you see. So don't think that like I show up and I'm like walking around saying smart stuff all day. It's like I'm saying a bunch of like clunky like again, someday I'll release like all the raw footage and you guys can like laugh at me. For now, it's nice that the world thinks that I'm like this like super smart guy who just like speaks in facts, but I'm not. So anyway, I'll go and I'll have these written and I'll show them to my editor before I go, and she will check them for tone. She will give them a quick edit before we go. This is all different. This actually didn't, I'm just editing this now actually, and I don't actually say this anymore. I did a totally different take because it was different when I got there. So this is what my scripts look like. And now Christina, who helps with production stuff, she speaks Spanish, so she was able to go in and look at our interviews and take time codes and throw in potential sound bites for these places. So, and then over here we have all of our sources fact-checked with a link. And that way, anything we say, this used to all be red, and once it's fact-checked, it turns green. So a lot of this is thought out before I go. It changed, and I went back and edited everything based on the change, but not much. The structure stayed very similar to the same. So if you do that, if you're prepared, being on the ground, everything is so much easier and so much more helpful.
So I think we have time for one more question or two. Yeah.
Should I just speak? Okay. Yeah, go for it. To me, it feels a bit like you're saying, hey guys, I figured it out how it works. We're just going to learn every field and become an expert on it. So go figure it out. Do you think that is a very good role model, or is it just for specific cases that it works so well?
My thought is that there is a lot of room for us to break down the barriers that we have to specialize. To me, it's a bigger problem that we say, oh, I'm a writer, I can't do that video thing. That's for the video people who are technically minded. I think that's a fallacy. And I think that's a mental thing. I don't think I think the capacity of our brains is that we could learn writing if we're video people. If we went to design school, we can learn how to write like a journalist. If we went to journalism school, we can learn to take photos like a photographer. I don't think that that's audacious, because that is the experiment of Vox. And we've been doing that for 4 years now and empowering people to say, okay, that isn't your strength, but why don't you pick up some of those skills? You will be a stronger creator because of it. So yeah, I do very strongly advocate for the idea, not necessarily that everyone is a one-man band and that you know all the skills really, really well, but that you at least break down the mental barrier that because you are a trained journalist, you have to fit within that box. And that you can't step out and say, no, I want to learn web design. I think that is trained in us because we go to university for this one thing and we're taught that we need to stay within that lane. But I think the success of a lot of work my colleagues and I do is because we've broken down those barriers and we've been able to straddle those lines. And even there are people at Vox who are trained journalists who have dabbled in animation. They've decided, I like this, but this isn't what I necessarily want to do. But at least they understand the process. They can speak that language so that then when they collaborate with an animator, suddenly they're using the word keyframe and composition, and they're using language so that they can collaborate in a way where they're speaking each other's language, so there isn't that lost in translation. I advocate unapologetically for more collaboration and more wearing more hats, and I think that that can be done amongst anyone who has the desire to learn. The resources are available. I learned everything I know on the internet, on YouTube and lynda.com and these resources. No institution gave me permission to be a filmmaker or to be a journalist, and I think a lot of people can. So that's my thought on that.
All right. There's more questions. Yeah, let's just do some more questions. Why not? Go for it.
I would be interested to hear 2-3 words about financement from Vox, or how Vox is financed and how you are financed.
Yep. So I'm a am full-time employee at Vox. So I'm on a salary at Vox and am just like any other staffer there. Vox has a budget for Borders that is not huge. I mean, I go, again, by myself and stay in normal hotels, and like I hire a fixer who's usually someone from the network. Like in Hong Kong, I didn't hire a professional fixer. I hired someone who was just out of university and like had a lot of the three languages I needed them to know, and had a desire to contribute. And so I got to pay them a fee that wasn't professional fixer fee. It was kind of entry level fee. And so for something like Hong Kong, 5 videos, I think it was probably maybe $7,000 for just the cost for hiring the people on the ground, and then plus whatever they paid me. And so these aren't giant numbers. I mean, compared to making documentaries, like it's very, very doable and accessible for like anyone to do this sort of thing. For for 12 days in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong was a more expensive place. Like Colombia was probably even cheaper, although we hired a really professional fixer in Colombia, so probably evened out. 7,000. I used to do these for like $4,000. They're cheap. I mean, if you think of a documentary production, this is like pennies, and yeah.
Is that also a way for people to get in the business, like to live really cheap, try to do all by themselves? And then
that's my thought.
The
internet is fertile soil for this sort of thing, where if someone wants to cultivate these skills on their own, they can do that for the cost of a camera and their free time to cultivate these skills. That's what I did for years. Like I didn't just like wake up one day and be like, oh, I'm good at all these skills. Like I made a bunch of like really crummy work that no one has ever seen. That's just like me putting in my time of just making stuff, because I really liked cameras. And so like Izzy and I bought a camera when we were in college and tried to make stuff. We did like wedding films and stuff. And I think it's more accessible than it's ever been. And but it does require doing the work, meaning it requires you going out and making stuff and making a bunch of really bad stuff. Again, like if you were to see my old stuff, like it is embarrassing. But I got it all out of my system so that when the day Vox was around and the day these opportunities came up, I was ready because I'd put in the time. I think it's more accessible than ever, especially to get a community. Like if I'd been uploading to YouTube, I probably would have been able to have some sort of community before Vox, but I wasn't doing that.
Mathieu?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether you really read out everything by yourself, or whether you do have experts at Vox that would possibly advise you on specifics, on special regions, on politics.
Totally. So one of the biggest resources is I call her a producer, but like that's such a generic word. She's originally was called a research fellow. Christina Thornell basically is the research machine. Like she'll go out and she will pull all the studies, she'll download the data, she'll set up calls with the experts, we'll get on the calls together, and then we report. Like I've got a network of think tank contacts now that I can go talk to who are experts in whatever field. And so we read all that, we become little mini experts over the course of a month. And then we're ready to start writing, and then we have an editorial process. An editor who reads and who's done foreign editing before, who reads our scripts and says like, this seems right, and then we do a rigorous fact checking. So, and then every once in a while I'll go over to the foreign pod, the newsroom, and I'll be like, hey, how does this sound? Like this is my take on Colombia. Like, does this add up? And if it's hypersensitive and they've written on it, like Middle East stuff, like they'll be like, oh, this is like a little bit thorny. You probably should reach out to this guy at this think tank who like knows all this. Like, so yeah, there's certainly between all those resources, we vet this. This is not me like waking up one day and reading a bunch of Wikipedia. Like we have an infrastructure to help like make sure that this is like accurate, and sensitive, for sure.
Okay.
How important do you think is your self-marketing in all of this? Because I've got a hard time wrapping my head around that you do all of this by yourself and then still get the good stories, which require a huge network and some whistleblower even. So do you think that people bring you stories because they know your persona and because of your self-marketing?
Now that happens. It didn't at first. If you watch pre-Borders work, Vox Docs is what I called it originally, and it was like, that was me with 0 followers, 0 anything. That was just me poking people on the ground, finding good fixers, finding good experts, and just asking the questions, talking to other reporters who had good contacts. It's always like, and when I hired for the research fellowship, my #1 criterion was no doesn't exist. Like if we want to figure out, like in the Haiti Dominican Republic, there was that boat that I get on to go with the merchant women. When Christina started, I was like, hey, I want to get on that boat. And she was like, that there's no email for the boat. Like, how do we get on the boat? And I was like, and I told her, I was like, this is an example of why I hired you. I know that you can do it. No is an answer. We can get on the boat. And she was like, okay. And she like went around and she emailed millions of people, found all these random ways, and eventually we got on the boat because she found like a daisy chain of 10 connections. That is the mentality. Again, I think it's a mental thing where it's like you can get into anywhere, you can find any story with enough emails to enough people. There's always someone who's connected. So yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and we do have the luxury of time. Like we take 6 weeks of just nonstop like poking, but it's always doable. So thank you guys very much. That was wonderful.
That was it. Thank you, Johnny.